Hey Pathfinders, our book has finally arrived. The Pathfinder's Journey is live on Amazon right now and ready for you. If you have already purchased our book and or left us a review, we thank you endlessly. If you haven't, what are you waiting for? The ebook sale of 99 cents won't last long, so head over to Amazon today to get your copy. Be sure to download the free 7-day reading journal to make your journey even more worthwhile. Well, that's all for now. Check out the link in the show notes to get your copy of The Pathfinder's Journey today. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the On Purpose Investor Podcast with your host, Eric and Tiffany Vogel. We spent several hard years building a rental property portfolio so we could have more time with our family and live our ideal life. Finding your path can be difficult, so we're here to help guide you along the way with lessons, tips, and tricks to design and implement your dream life through real estate investing. Now sit back, turn up the volume, and get ready for this episode of the On Purpose Investor. Hey Pathfinders, and welcome back to the On Purpose Investor Podcast with your host, Eric. And Tiffany is not with us today. Here on episode 24, we're going to be diving into each episode, 13 through 23. If you've been an avid listener all season long, we are so thankful to have you on the Pathfinder team. But if this is your first episode jumping into the On Purpose Investor Podcast, there's no better place for you to be. And that's because on today's episode, we're going to bring out the little pieces of gold from each episode, 13 through 23. That way you get a summarized version of the whole season here on this episode. So jumping into episode 13, how it all began. In this short snippet, you'll hear the power of immersion, the power of getting out of your comfort zone, and the power of sacrificing what brings you comfort and taking those next steps into becoming a Pathfinder.
We found a local meetup group through Bigger Pockets. A friend of ours, Mike Williams, who works with Brandon now, was posting it on the site. So we attended, and I remember I absolutely hated going because I'm such an introvert and I was so unsure of myself. But we would go. Eric would always show up late because he was coming from across town and got off work later than I did. I got there early even though I didn't want to. And I would find someone to sit with, and just my question every time was, so what do you invest in? Are you a buy and hold? Are you a flipper? Like, what do you do? And that would just start the conversation.
You know, if you want to be successful in anything, you have to immerse yourself.
Yeah.
And us go into this meeting every single month and not missing a beat, not skipping anything, making sure that that was our number one priority. We're going. Even though we have nothing going on, we don't have any rentals, or, we don't have any money to go buy properties, but we needed to immerse ourselves. And so we made that a huge priority.
Yeah. So
we're going.
We went to the meeting every month. I listened to podcasts nonstop.
I listened to one on the way to work and one on the way back from work.
I had more bandwidth because you can't really listen to podcasts while you're teaching, but I could while I was working.
Yeah.
And I would go walk the neighborhood to get some exercise and listen to podcasts. And I'd be doing dishes and listening to podcasts. It was
audiobooks and podcasts for me.
Yeah. Information overload at times, but we really immersed ourselves. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we gave up watching TV.
We eliminated everything.
Right.
That wasn't...
I think we didn't even have a Netflix or anything.
No.
We canceled all of it because we needed every penny we could save to put into the houses.
I had XM radio at the time. Nix that.
Of course you did. We were analyzing deals. We would play cash flow. We would sit there, each of us on our laptops in the living room on the couch together, and play cash flow against each other and really learn that game.
And hours and hours.
We went all in.
And we would analyze deals together. Do you think we could make this work? Or
what do you think the renovation costs are?
Right. And then we started, eventually we were like, let's find us a realtor and start looking at houses. And we started going to look at houses. So what did you get out of episode 13? Are you going to find a way to immerse yourself into whatever it is you're doing? And if you're listening to this podcast, you might be going into real estate investing. You might be doing something else. Either way, the power of immersion is truly powerful. What are you going to do to get outside of your comfort zone? Are you uncomfortable making phone calls? Are you uncomfortable attending in-class things? Did COVID make you scared of people? During the time, sure, 6-foot distance, but we're out of that. So What are you going to do to get out of your comfort zone? And lastly, what are you going to be willing to sacrifice and give up in order to make achieving your dream life more attainable? Are you willing to give up subscriptions? Are you willing to give up purchasing that new car? Are you willing to get rid of a second car and make a sacrifice of planning around one car so that you can save money? There are many ways that we can sacrifice. I still find myself today finding ways to sacrifice something or some time or some money. I sacrifice something in order to get something I need more. And sure, I want a lot. You know, that's the human and truly the American spirit, is to have stuff and to want stuff. But what are you willing to sacrifice and say, you know what, I'm going to embrace the delayed gratification. I will get it some point down the line, and that's okay. But for today, I need to focus on my dream life because that's where I want to be. So you know what? I don't need that new car. I don't need that second car. I don't need the toys. I don't need the boats, the ATVs. What can you sacrifice in order to live that dream life? Moving into episode 14, is education worth it? And I tell you, on this episode, we talk very broadly about all the different educational paths that you can take. And the big overarching idea of the episode is, are you going to pay for education and learn how to do it through the courses? Or are you going to learn by doing? Either way, you're going to pay. And sometimes one costs more than the other. In this snippet, we're going to show you how we took something small, like listening to a podcast or reading a book, and we're going to show you how we made that small action a big step and got the most out of it. Let's dive in. When you sit down after a course or after reading a book or during a course or during reading a book and you list out things, think of it as brainstorming. You're mind mapping what could be.
Yeah.
Just because you write it down doesn't mean you have to do it, but it's a great way to just travel through your brain and say, you know, let's take into consideration Gary Johnston's financial freedom principles. He's like, dream big, you know, here's the list of things that you want and you're listing them out. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to work to go get those items because those items may change. You're just big picture dreaming of the things.
Right.
And just because you write something down doesn't mean you have to do it, but it is the first step to achieving it.
Right. And I would even challenge you and recommend, as you're taking in any of this education content, have a sheet of paper or a notebook where you just write tidbits of takeaways, and once a week, try to apply one of them.
Yeah.
And I think Gary does that in his course book. He pushes you to make those key takeaways as you go through the course.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I've really taken from him. So when I'm reading a book or going through a course, I make notes of this is something to follow up on later. And sometimes it's just refer back to page 52 of the pamphlet.
Mm-hmm.
So that way at the end, I have all my notes ready and then I can work through those key takeaways. So I guess all of that to say just some ways to make the education more impactful that's worked for us.
Right. All right. So episode 14, is education worth it? Are you going to get out that notepad and pen and start taking notes and begin brainstorming what you're truly learning? The power of brainstorming is huge. You listen to an episode of something. Maybe it's even the On Purpose Investor podcast, and you're listening to some episode, and something unique stands out to you, and you're like, wow, I needed to hear that. Or, wow, I could really have used that in the past, or maybe I can use this in the future. Jot down that one word or that one phrase, or just take a note on the timestamp of when that was and draw a circle around it. And then start building out different veins of what can you do to implement it in your life, in your business, and then break off on those as well and figure out what can I do as a daily action to start seeing this come to fruition within my life. Being truly intentional about what you're listening to, what you're reading, that is what's going to carry you to the next stage of your life. Being just hyper intentional. So jot down some notes, draw a circle around it, and start brainstorming the different ways you can either incorporate it more, start thinking about it more, or trying to be more aware that's something you need to focus on. I challenge you to do that, and I think you're going to see some insane benefits in your life because of it. All right, so episode 15. We're diving into the episode called The Early Days. And this episode, we talk about our first intentional purchase of a rental property and how we made the offer on that property, and we spent 6 months of wasted time and wasted dollars because of a lack of education. But what we learned in that time period was incredibly valuable. And then we dive into how during that 6 months while we were trying to buy this other property, we didn't stop looking. And we ended up finding our actual first investment property. And this was a property that was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house that had a little detached garage. And we went in and added a bedroom and a bathroom without changing the floor plan in the house. And then we renovated the apartment. And ultimately, this episode talks about the insane amount of sacrifice Tiffany and I went through and what it took to make it. We didn't have time in our schedule, but we made time. We didn't have money, but we found money. And this is just a short snippet of what it took for us to get our first intentional property. Let's dive in.
So Eric was out for summer break from teaching, so he was out there all day. He had some of the students come out and help him, then he'd pay them to work. Had some other band director friends. This was a musical home of
yes, it was.
Band directors and students.
I had helpers come in and help me, hold joists while I nailed it in, or help me paint, or help me blow insulation in the attic. We had all kinds of help out there.
Yeah, you took the air mattress.
Yep.
And you had some PB&J and some Pop-Tarts and probably some beer.
There was actually no beer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had gallons of water and a lot of Gatorade.
All right.
Because there was no AC in the apartment at that time. And it was just hot. And it was the middle of Georgia summer. I figured it out. I replaced windows. I ran electrical in that little apartment and ran some plumbing. I didn't build a bathroom or anything.
It was mostly cosmetic in there.
Yep. And so I rebuilt the porch.
The kitchen floor.
And the kitchen floor, right. So got that property all set up, and we got it rented out in
a month
in July.
That's crazy.
And, thinking back,
how did we do that?
How did that happen?
Because even with a contractor, turning around a unit in a month is aggressive.
It was a lot of sweat, sweat equity. So, and then once that's rented out, I moved over to the house and started working on it. And when did we get the house rented out?
So that was end of September.
Right. And you got to think, I'm a teacher and I'm in the Army, National Guard. So at the end of June, early July, I'm at annual training with the military. So there's 2 full weeks right there that I'm gone and not able to work on stuff. But I did. So I would go do annual training up in North Atlanta. And then at the end of my duty day, I would drive back down and work on the property and fix that house a little bit. So that was about an hour and 30-minute drive to get from my duty station down to the project house. In the fall, when I finished with the apartment and got that done and rented out, I would go teach band. And it was marching band season, so we had practice almost every day after school. And we'd finish about 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. I'd go straight to that project house and then start running plumbing and electrical and painting and drywalling. And Tiffany would meet me down there
with dinner
while I got there with dinner. And we'd scrap down some food in the kitchen, eating on paper towels, and get to work.
Yeah.
It was an insane amount of just, we didn't do anything else. There was so much sacrifice that went into it. We didn't go hang out with friends. We didn't go to family functions. Every Saturday we were there. Yeah. That we didn't have something band related. Every Sunday we were there.
I remember being on a stepladder, doing spackling over that tub and listening to podcasts, learning. It was just non-stop, pedal to the metal.
It was.
But we had big goals. We were confident in our relationship, even though it had only been a year. So we knew we wanted time freedom when our kids were born. Yeah, it was early on. We were serious, but we weren't engaged. So I guess to have that big vision and roadmap is what made it worth it. Because that sucked.
Yeah,
just
there was an insane amount of suck to it.
Yeah.
So episode 15, the early days. That little snippet just gave you a brief snapshot of a little bit of the sacrifice we had to make. And moving forward into our careers from that point, we just continued to sacrifice until we had enough, either residual income off of monthly cash flow, or we had built enough up from, cash outs that we could afford to hire help and in the sense of contractors and building our team more. But when we first got started, it was just Tiffany and I and the dogs, and we just went all in. If you want to know more about what that property is doing now, how it changed, how we did all of that for just $200 a month. And it seems kind of crazy now, but we did all that for $200 a month. But 3-4 years later, it's doing a lot more than that. And what that screams to me is that it doesn't really matter what it starts out as. It's what you see it becoming. It's what it can be. And we just knew that we had to get started, even if for just $200 a month, because today it's way more than that. And you can get all of those details by jumping into episode 15. So now we're going to jump into episode 16, building an intentional community. And it sounds like we might jump in a little all of a sudden right here, but just give you a little pretext. Tiffany and I were talking about immersing yourself into the realm of real estate investing, and it kind of took a little tangent where we talked about how a boy lived in the woods with wolves, and he was known as Wolf Boy. And then we ultimately started talking about how my dog, Maggie, lived with a cat, and now she has mannerisms of a cat and, has catitude. Anyways, let's jump into episode 16 where we talk about building an intentional community. What is it really going to take for you to escalate yourself to the next level? How does it feel, and what does it look like to fully immerse yourself and build that intentional community?
So we want to talk about how you can build that immersion for your mindset as you take on the path of becoming an investor and really building your dream life. Whether you decide to go through real estate investing in particular, or you're just trying to find ways towards financial independence in your dream life, surrounding yourself with community can be, I think, the difference maker between success and failure.
Right. And, on Bigger Pockets, they always talk about, why do you think people give up, fail, or never get started? Yeah. And I think my answer to that question would be they never gave it enough energy, never invested 100% of themselves. And in order to give yourself 100% to real estate investing, my opinion of it would be you need to fully immerse. And some of the things that we did to begin immersing when we were starting out was listening to those podcasts, watching those webinars, reading those books, but we weren't meeting in person with people. We were listening to them. We were seeing them. We were reading from them or about them. And the only way we could take it that next step was to attend in-person meetings.
Yeah. We were heavy into Bigger Pockets because it was the online resource at the time.
It was free.
Right. So we were heavy into podcasts. We were heavy into reading the forums and the webinars. And we looked and found this local meetup about 45 minutes from us. We show up to this meetup. I get there before Eric because he was coming from school. I was coming from home. We meet up there, order our pancakes at the local IHOP. And we sat down, felt like we were drinking from a fire hose.
For months, yes, it seemed.
And we would call each other on the way home and just word vomit. Did you hear this? Did you hear that? Like back and forth. But we were starting to get to know people. And when we had a deal come across our lap, we were able to ask around and find private money because our initial private money source only had a certain amount of money available to lend. So we needed more money. So that's how we found money. And that group really launched us into our business.
Yeah. So if you immerse yourself in a different country, in a different language, and you just sit around and listen, you're going to soak up some knowledge, but you're not going to get really good at talking and understanding and writing in that language unless you participate. You have to participate. So you have to start talking in that language. So when you go to these meetings, when you go to these meetups, or, you go to a seminar and there's a networking event, you have to participate if you want anything of worth to come out of it. You have to engage in conversation.
Right.
So there it is, episode 16, build an intentional community. So building that intentional community, how are you going to tackle that? What are you going to do to get out of your comfort zone? And maybe you're a people person and, you find it very easy to talk to people and to put yourselves in those situations, but not everyone's like that. I know my wife, Tiffany, is quite an introvert at times, but, she really put herself out there when we went to these meetups and got out of her comfort zone and met people, and we networked and we built relationships. Those relationships are the foundation on which we stand, because without those key relationships, we would not have the things we have today, whether it's deals we've come across, whether it's fundings that we've needed, whether it's connections we've needed during renovations. Your network is truly everything to you. And you got to be extremely intentional on building that network. Now, let's move on to episode 17. In this episode, we uncover the ultimate BRRRR for our business. And BRRRR is, buy it, rehab it, rent it out, refinance, repeat the process. It's hard to repeat when you don't in a great way and you can't pull out a lot of cash. And, we got so incredibly, quote unquote, lucky with this property because we were able to pull out a substantial amount of cash on the refinance that really got that snowball going. So in this episode, we talk about our ultimate BRRRR. We go into the nitty gritty on what the rehab was like, how much did we put into it, how much did we pull out, and what it looked like for us moving forward from it. And we also talk a little bit about creating luck. What is luck in real estate investing? All right, let's dive in.
We start this refinance and we get the appraisal back. And I think we were both just stunned.
We knew it was a deal changer. When that email came in and it said $200,000, it just blew our mind.
Right. In essence, we at closing got a $75,000 check.
Yep.
That paid back our renovation money and gave us $50,000 to go buy the next few houses.
And we paid off Jim Bob.
Right.
And he was happy because he's like, wow, 6 months and I got my money back. And
plus all the interest.
And we told him like what it appraised for. And he's like, wow, y'all really know how to find deals. And that really established our relationship with him. We didn't know how to find deals at that point, but we did.
We knew it was a good deal. We didn't know it was a home run.
Yeah, we pursued it really hard though.
So we wound up with $50,000 in equity. So in essence, we printed $100,000 with that deal. So we had $50,000 in equity, $50,000 in our pocket above what we had invested in the house. And that's what we used to fund our next few purchases. Mm-hmm. I guess I don't want to discourage anyone if you don't find a deal like this, especially in today's market. This was several years ago that we bought it. It made it work for us. But not having a deal like this doesn't mean you can't make big moves and reach success.
Yes, absolutely. If you work hard and you find a great deal, it may not be a bring home $50,000 out of your BRRRR type of deal, but if you can break even on several deals
and get that monthly,
or bring home $10,000 or $5,000 off of several deals, you could still easily make it.
And our subsequent BRRRRs did not appraise. And we knew the values were there, and the values just did not come in for us. So we left a lot of money in our future deals. But this kind of launched us. And I guess I just want to encourage you, you have no chance of hitting a home run BRRRR like this if you don't get out there and do deals.
Right.
So what's the quote? Like, luck, it comes to those who work hard.
Yeah, maybe luck doesn't come to those who wait.
Yeah, I should have looked it up. But
I think it's more or less you create your own luck by doing.
Right. You're not going to get lucky on a deal unless you are doing deals.
Yeah. You can't catch a fish if you're not fishing.
Wow. All right.
So there it is, episode 17, the ultimate BRRRR. I know that snippet did not dive into all of the nitty-gritty details, but if you want all those details, hop on over to episode 17, the ultimate BRRRR. Check that one out. It was a lot of fun to make, a lot of fun to reminisce. All right, so moving on to episode 18. Change your life through sacrifice. And on this episode, we kind of get into your feelings a little bit and really drive you to question what you are spending your money on. What are you going to do to set yourself up to write a check today that you will cash in 10 years? What is that check going to look like? And what's going to be in the memo block? And how are you going to set yourself up to make sure you can cash that check in 10 years? What is going to be the carrot that dangles in front of you? What are you ultimately going to be willing to give up in order to make it? Sacrifice is a huge part of making it as an entrepreneur, as a real estate investor, just in making it in general. What are you willing to give up? Let's dive in.
So the way I like to think of it is you're writing a check right now for your life in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And how much is going to be on that check? How much work are you willing to put in so that you can put a big fat number on that check so your future self can live off of the work that you put in this decade?
So it's a delayed gratification check.
Yes. We need the delayed gratification Care Bear.
We do.
And we'll start working on that soon.
Maybe. So you have this check and you're writing it to 10-year Tiffany.
Yes.
And you say, 10-year Tiffany, here's a check for $10 million. But you can't cash it until year 10. And you can't cash it unless you do all these things in the memo block.
Right.
And all those things in the memo block have to happen in order for you to cash it.
Right. So think about who do you want to be a year from now even, or 10 years, or pick the time horizon that feels most appropriate. But when you want to be that person, there are things that have to happen for you to become that future self. And what are you willing to do today that will get you to that future self?
It takes that carrot, that little carrot that's hanging in front of you that causes you to run. Was it a carrot in front of a horse's mouth to run? The carrot in front of the horse makes it run faster.
Yeah.
What's the carrot in front of your mouth? What's making you run a little faster? And ours was our dream life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why it's so important to have a clear roadmap for your life and what you want out of life, because that's your carrot. That's what's going to drive you through the sacrifice and the hard times.
Right.
You want to be sure to give up things that will help you focus on the things that will get you to your dream life. So don't just sacrifice things for the sake of sacrificing. You want to, instead of spending time or money on something that's going to give you comfort and relaxation, invest that time and money into things that are going to help you reach your goals in your dream life. Some of the things that you can give up today for your future self and family is spending, for one example.
What are you willing to sacrifice that you're spending your money on? I like to say it, stop spending money on things you don't need.
All right, so sacrifice, change your life through sacrifice. And, in that little clip right there, I challenged you to cut spending and stop spending money on things that you don't need. So what are you going to do? What is that carrot hanging in front of you that is going to encourage you to stop and to sacrifice that one thing or that group of things so that you can chase your dream life? That's all up to you, though. So this next episode number 19, is our biggest sacrifice. And leading up to this episode, a little earlier in the clip, what you won't hear is how we moved out of our house and into a camper, and how we bounced around state park to state park, following, my summer jobs, and Tiffany could work from home. But, in this one, we talk about how I blew up the camper and how that kind of pushed us in the direction of moving into the ghost house. And it was a fun and strange time in our investing career, but without the big sacrifice of, for 8 months, we lived in a camper. And without that sacrifice, we wouldn't be where we are today. We had to give up a lot of comfort to get to where we are. All right, let's dive in.
We get the electrical rough end done, and we get all the electrical set up. And, in the meantime, we're just running off this one outlet that's running off the old electrical system. And I call my electrician. I was like, hey, can you get this roughed in one day? Because we're living out back, and I need to be able to have electricity. He's like, it might be 2 days. So I get a generator. I think I borrow a generator or whatnot. We live off a generator for like 2 or 3 days. And he comes in, rough ends, we get the inspection, we get power turned on. And I needed to run a hard wire from the house to our camper instead of living off this drop cord. And, in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's a 30 amp running a camper, so obviously it needs to be a 220. I go through the full hassle. I run this cable, I get it out there, I set it up, and about 11 o'clock at night, I get finished.
So for people that don't know electrical voltage and all that good stuff, you ran more power?
I ran twice as much as I should have.
Okay.
It should have been a 110, and I ran a 220.
Okay.
And so I run the wire, I get it all set up around 11 o'clock at night, and I plug it in. As soon as I plug it in, I hear some sounds from inside. And I open up the camper door, I'm like, that's a strange sound. So I open up the camper door, and there's white smoke everywhere. And the lights are out. And I immediately yell, Tiffany, get out, get out, get out.
Yeah.
And she's asleep.
Yeah. And I'm sleeping in a t-shirt, no pants.
Yep.
Had panties on, thankfully.
There you go.
And the way this house is set up, you see your neighbors. So I'm standing out in the yard at 11 o'clock at night with one of those big lights, like a safety light.
Yeah,
so
there's
it's
a security light out back.
So it's well lit. And I'm standing there with no pants on, just like, what's going on?
The TVs in the camper are putting out white smoke. Every outlet, there's white electrical smoke everywhere. And I guess it was at that moment I realized it needs 110.
Word to the wise. Do not put 220 into an RV. Well, unless, of course, it is a RV that takes 220, which I don't know if they make those or not. So that was a quick little snippet of the episode where we talked about our biggest sacrifice, which was giving up all comfort, moving into an RV, kind of becoming a little nomadic, jumping around, and living behind our renovation sites. In this next episode, number 20, we talk about scarcity versus abundance and the mindset of being scarce or the mindset of being abundant. And we uncover how our scarce mindset could have really kept us held back had we not become abundant with our mentality to pay for education. And when we bought the cruise to go learn from Bill Cook, Kim Cook, Pete Fortunato, Dyke Spotiford, without going on that trip, we would have stayed in a scarce mindset. You'll hear in the snippet how I went up to Pete and introduced myself, and in just the first few sentences of him talking back to me, I realized how scarce and limited my mindset was. And opening your mind is a huge and powerful thing. Let's dive into episode 20. Well, I can't do it, and if I can't have all of it, I don't want none of it.
Right.
That's a scarce mindset.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it can also be right now rates for like hard money loans is 10%. And it's like, well, I don't want to pay 10% interest. That's so high. And walking away from a deal because you don't want to pay extra in interest or a high interest rate, but you would still clear a good profit on it if you just be willing to pay that.
You were closed-minded to what those numbers look like.
Right. Yep, definitely.
So having that scarce mindset is a limiting belief system.
Yeah.
Is really what it is.
And we had it early on, our hesitancy to pay for education. We talked about that on a previous episode. We didn't want to spend money on courses because we thought it was a waste of time and it was a waste of, several $100s that could be invested in the business.
Right.
And we finally decided a couple of years in to go on a cruise that was a seminar cruise, and it changed everything about our business.
We were about 18 months into our investing journey when we went on that cruise. So for 18 months, I think we had bought 3 or 4 rental properties before we went on this cruise.
Right. And we read a lot of books. We listened to a lot of podcasts, so we were still educated.
We had a ton of education.
But I think it was the network and the community that really
And it was being around people that would challenge you. And, I remember going up to Pete Fortunato on that cruise. I told him, I was like, hey, we've been investing for a year and a half, and we've bought 4 rental properties. Like, why only 4? And in my mind, I was like, we're winning. We're doing great. And then, Pete says, why only 4? And it just challenged me to think, like, in my head, I was winning, but in his head, he was saying, you could be winning even more.
Yeah.
And just being around people like that would increase your thoughts and of what success looks like and what your capabilities are. So there we learned a little bit about scarcity versus abundance and the mindset of them both, how scarce mindset can hold you back. While it's important at times to have a scarce mindset, especially when there are big risks involved, it's okay to have a scarce mindset. But if you can calculate the risks and you can make sure that they're well calculated and accurate, it's okay to be abundant in risky things, just so long as you understand the outcome and the consequences, risk rewards, So what are you going to do to challenge yourself to think more abundantly? What things are in your mindset right now that are limited? What are your limited beliefs? And is it coming from a place of scarcity? How can you convert that to a sense of abundance? Episode 21, strategies for hard times. In this episode, we dive into a little bit about how we bought a property to not rent out as a single family home. And we talk about how we set it up to rent by the room. Now, is this going to be a rent by the room rental forever? We don't know. But we do know that it cash flows very well in a market where it's difficult to buy a home at market value. But having said that, this home would still cash flow if we paid market value for it today. All right, let's dive into episode 21.
We bought houses mostly off the MLS. I think at that point, everything had been off the MLS, but most of our houses came from the MLS. We would burr them. So we'd buy them, fix them up, add a bedroom or a bathroom if we could, and then get a tenant in, rent it out, refinance it, take the cash as much cash as we could to pay down loans and credit card debt and all that. And
then, to put it toward the next property.
Right. That was our strategy. But in July of 2020, the market started to shift. So July of 2020, we bought this house. We knew we wanted it. It's in a upcoming part of town. And when you did your walkthrough inspection, you saw a great crawl space.
Yeah, it was great. All the plumbing had been converted from cast iron to PVC. All of the plumbing had been rerun. It was all packed. There
was a vapor barrier down.
Yeah, it was great. The only thing I had to do down there was insulate the joist.
Yeah. Upstairs looked rough, like in the house.
It was clean, but it was just outdated and needed a lot of patchwork.
Right.
It was, a little 4x4.
Was it plaster?
Yeah, it was plaster.
So
it still is plaster.
Okay.
But it was a 4x4. There was a kitchen and bathroom in the back right of the house. And then there was individual rooms, back left, front right. I had a hallway installed between front left and back left bedroom. Yeah. So now there's a little pass-through hallway.
Right, and you put a closet in with that little hallway.
There's a closet in there. And, it set it up to where there are 3 very unique spaces for beds to be. So and we bought this one intentionally to set up as a rent by the room situation.
Yeah, so we met someone on the cruise, the infamous cruise that we went on, who uses this model, and everyone talks about him like he's the greatest thing, and he is the greatest thing. Super smart.
Quite a character. I really enjoy his company.
So we were like, this guy he's killing it. Like, let's try this model. Mm-hmm. So we decided to rent by the room. And
they require us to put a bed with a bed frame and a nightstand with a lamp in each room. And then just make sure you have the common spaces set up, a place for them to sit if they want to eat somewhere. Yep. So we have a little 2-top tiny table in there, which I know doesn't ever get used. This house sort of became the dumping ground for furniture that we had just had, either from our prior lives or childhood.
No, Eric would find couches, and I would yell at him, "Do not bring that into our house."
I beg to differ, because your old bed is in that house. My old bed is in there. My old bed from childhood is in that house. Yeah, that's because with new mattresses, but those frames are in that house. And okay, I did find a chair out of a house that I had bought previously and didn't really have anything to do with the couch, but I was like, let's go put it in.
I told him if it comes in our house, I am going to probably kill him.
Yeah.
So he found a place for it.
So we put some couches in there, which they definitely discourage putting couches in rent by the room type of houses because it encourages sleepovers and extra people, but neither here nor there.
We do not hear from the people in this house, though. So I'm good with it.
And every time I drop by, none of the lights are being left on in the common spaces. The AC hasn't been tampered with.
Right.
The fridge has been kept up and it's nice and clean, and all the mail that needs to be sorted is sorted. I go over there, pick up mail that doesn't belong at the house, put it in the mailbox, say return to sender, or maybe we got something over there about, hey, I want to buy your house.
Right.
And just make sure the lawn is being kept up.
Yeah.
It's it's pretty low touch for the most part.
Compared to a traditional rental, we're making a few extra $100. It's not like a home run on this one. But I think it's such a low maintenance house because everyone has their own private entrance. So they're not really interacting like a typical rent by the room situation. Right. So we wanted to use this house as a testing ground to see, does it work, especially in our market.
To rent by the room.
Yeah.
Right?
So we wanted to try this new strategy, and because the house was pretty cheap and the note on it, the payment's really low, we just decided, it's a low risk situation. Let's try it. And we realized, hey, this works. So when our tenant moved out of the Corona house where we broke even that year, that was in, I think, January, February of 21, we said, let's go ahead and convert this one to rent by the room.
That's right.
So there it is, episode number 21, Strategies for Hard Times. What can you do in your portfolio, or what can you do as a new investor to either change your strategy or to start a strategy that will work in a market like we're seeing today? Recording this today, July of 2022, we're seeing, crazy inflation. We're seeing home prices that are highly elevated, and they might be fair, but they are more expensive than they were this time last year. So how can you go and buy a house for market value and still apply the 1% rule? And that 1% rule means if you bought a house for $200,000, that your gross rent should be $2,000. That's probably hard to do in some cities and some markets. But if you rent it by the room, that does make it a little bit more achievable. Now, you don't have to rent by the room to make a house cash flow. You could also set it up as a short-term rental. You could set it up as a corporate rental. You could set it up as a VRBO, which is like Airbnb. So, it's up to you to figure out what strategy works best for you. But what I will say is, don't give up because the market's changing. Change your strategy, change your lens of focus, and figure out what works and drive in that direction. All right, so the next episode is SMART Goals, episode number 22. And in this one, we're going to talk about how when we first got started, we approached our entire business with a SMART Goals approach. And, we really break it down. What does SMART Goals stand for and how did we apply it? Hopefully, this will be something where you can grab a pen and paper and jot down SMART and figure out what can you do to either begin or to continue your journey as an investor and as a Pathfinder. Let's dive in. Tiffany, what does SMART stand for, other than how amazing your husband is? What does SMART stand for?
It is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
All right. So when I said, let's buy these 2 houses this year, you said, we're going to break it down into SMART goals. So it was very specific. 2 houses in 12 months. Right. So it was very specific. And it was measurable. 2 houses. Mm-hmm. Right. And now there are some smaller benefactors in those 2 houses that could have been even more measurable, as in how much cash flow would those houses make?
How much cash do you need to buy them?
How much cash do you want to leave in the deal after the refinance? If you're doing the BRRRR strategy, what type of funding would you want to use? Those are different, measurable.
Some of your required metrics, like you need a certain cash on cash return, or like you said, the cash flow per door unit. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that can go into it, but you want to be as specific as possible.
Right. So we had the measurable component. Mm-hmm. Attainable. Now, this is something where I kind of struggled with reading the book, and I was like, yep, we're going to do it. We're going to make this happen.
And that was a stretch.
It was. And was it attainable? We didn't know. Right. We didn't know if it was attainable or not, but that's kind of the idea with a BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal, is to shoot for something that you don't feel like is attainable.
Right.
But it was within reach. We didn't say we're going to go buy 50 houses in 1 year. That would have been a little obnoxious unless we had the capital to do that.
And the time. There would be a lot that would have to have gone into it. Because
the capital,
at that point,
the time, the know-how to manage that much at one time.
Yeah, you were still teaching at that point. Mm-hmm. I was still working my job. We were dating. We weren't even engaged. So that goal was very attainable for that stage of life.
If we had that BHAG of 50 properties in 1 year, would it have been attainable? I don't know. I don't think it would have been even plausible because we didn't know how to do that.
Right. It's not relevant for us. That was not our goal.
So that's the R, the relevant.
Right. So I think the point with relevant is look at your 3-year roadmap and what you want out of life and build your goals from there. So if you want 25 houses over 3 years, figure out how many you need to buy in the first year.
Yeah.
And it's probably not going to be a third of that number because you'll get the snowball and you'll scale faster. So pick something that feels reasonable for that first year, but also push yourself a little bit because you can achieve a lot more than you realize.
So the last step is time bound. So I said, those 2 houses I want to get in a 12-month time. All right, there you have it. SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. How can you apply that to your life, to your business? Even if you're not a real estate investor, you can use SMART goals for anything in your life. In the rest of that episode, we even talk about how to apply SMART goals to something like losing weight. So get out a pen and paper, list out those 5 topics: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, and break down the different goals you have for your life. I think you'll find that you'll achieve them more frequently and you'll achieve them with a greater sense of accomplishment because along the way, you knew exactly what you were doing step by step. And you didn't go after a goal that wasn't attainable because if you approached it like a SMART goal, you would know that that just doesn't fit within your roadmap. That doesn't fit with your top 10. That doesn't fit your why. All right. Driving on to the last episode of our season was episode number 23, The Snowball Effect. Now, in this snippet, the end of the episode, and the reason I clipped the end was to share with you how our snowball grew exponentially larger because of our relationships. And your snowball, when you first get started, it's going to seem like it's going to go nowhere or it's going nowhere fast. But I promise you, if you just get that little bit of snow just bunched up in your fingers and you start rolling it around in the snow on the ground, you'll eventually get to something that you might crash a truck into and total the truck. I'm just saying, the ball will grow. Your snowball will compound. You have to give it all of your attention, all of your energy, but the most important thing, you got to be patient. All right, episode 23, The Snowball Effect. Let's dive in.
It's going to be hard to imagine what future you can do because it's so hard to fathom that a snowball can build so large.
Yeah.
And can build so effectively.
You learn a lot in the first year or two. Mm-hmm. I'm a different person, and I know you are too.
Absolutely.
Who we were 4 years ago.
Yeah, no kidding. And, the whole idea is that your snowball has to start somewhere. And we were able to solve these problems and get these houses because we started building our snowball 4 years ago.
Yeah, and we had community. When we had these off-market deals come across our lap, we had no clue how to build that contract.
Yeah. I remember I called my buddy Carrie and I was like, hey, Carrie, I got a sub 2 that I'm working through right now. And I just need to run some things by you just to see that I'm doing things right. And he was really good at saying, have you thought about this? Did you include this in your contract? What's your exit strategy on this part of the deal? How are you going to move this little lever to otherwise move this lever within the contract? And having that community and someone to be there to be a sounding board.
Yeah.
And it's not like I went to this person and said, hey, I need you to teach me how to do this sub 2 deal. I had a basic understanding of subject 2 deals.
You did your research online. You just didn't know some of the nuances.
And I went to Cashflow Depot and bought my lifetime subscription and got access to the paperwork for sub 2 deals and got to listen to different people teach on subject 2 deals, on how to communicate with a seller, how to communicate with the existing mortgage holder, how to set up those payment accounts, how to make sure you're doing it safe, secure, and legal. And so I did my research. The only reason I called my buddy Carrie was because I just needed a little bit of probably encouragement that I was doing the right thing.
Right.
Just a sounding board that, hey, I've done all this work, but I just, as a friend and a colleague, I need you to just tell me I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
Honestly, I just wanted a sounding board.
Right.
But don't expect someone to be your sounding board if you're not putting in some work yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And if you don't have a lifetime subscription to Cashflow Depot, I encourage you to go do it. Good friends of ours, Bill and Kim Cook, have taken that over and got some big things coming with Cashflow Depot, I'm sure, in the future, moving forward. Find everything Jack Miller there as well, who was elite real estate investor, educator from the 80s to the early 2010.
There it is, episode 23, The Snowball Effect. So what are you going to do today, this week, this month, or even this year, this decade, to begin building your snowball? Some of you will find success in the next 12 months. Some of you will reach your goals at the end of this year. Some of you, it might take 5 years. But it all has to start in one place. It starts with you being hyper-focused and hyper-diligent about beginning your snowball. Don't become impatient and upset and frustrated that your snowball hasn't gotten bigger faster. You'll see on our website in the blog section, I wrote a couple of different blogs. One is Run Your Own Race, and the other one is Keeping Up with the Joneses. And those two blogs, I feel like, will be very beneficial to those that are, having trouble being patient with their snowball getting bigger. It's important to focus on your race. Don't compare your year 1 to someone else's year 10. It's not something that will bring you a lot of joy, and it's definitely not something that will bring you success any faster. So that's it for Season 2 of the On Purpose Investor podcast. We're very thankful for you as listeners and your support. During this season, we covered a lot of different things that include teaching elements and our story. We really hope that through our sharing of our story and our teaching elements, that you will be just one step, if not a million steps closer to your goals, and that you can sit down, create your goals, draft your roadmap, discover your why, and begin your journey as a Pathfinder. And speaking of Pathfinder, if you haven't went out and seen our book on Amazon, we're really excited to have the book out there for everyone to read about Charlie and Liza and how they became Pathfinders through the guide and help of Dan. The Pathfinder's journey, it's waiting for you. There's a 7-day reading journal that is absolutely free at onpurposeinvestor.com/Pathfinder. If you do that journal, I would love for you to email me what you've written in there just so I can see, how it's working for you and be happy to give you advice, tips, tricks. Tiffany and I both would. So that's it for Season 2 of the On Purpose Investor podcast. We're super excited to be already working on Season 3, and it'll be out in just a few short weeks. All right, we're going to take a break for now, but in the meantime, chase those dreams, chase those goals, continue that hard work along your roadmap, and never give up. You only get one life, so live it purposefully. That's all for today, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Are you ready to discover and build your dream life? Then it's time to become a Pathfinder. Head over to onpurposeinvestor.com and sign up for our newsletter to get tips and tricks to help you find your path and get the latest from our blog. If you haven't already, we'd really appreciate an honest review on your favorite podcast app. If you're enjoying this show, share it with friends, family, and fellow investors. See you next time at the On Purpose Investor Podcast.